In the year 27 BCE, as dawn settled over the stone streets of Rome, the city presented itself as orderly, disciplined, and moral. From the outside, the empire appeared stable, governed by law, tradition, and the authority of fathers. But behind closed doors, inside private homes, protected from witnesses, another Rome existed. A Rome where fear carried more weight than law, where silence mattered more than truth, where a daughter's fate could be decided without trial, without appeal, and without record. This was a city where reputation was treated as a form of currency, where honor was inherited, guarded, and enforced through family control, and where women, especially daughters, were expected to embody that honor without question.
When that expectation was perceived to fail, the consequences were not handled by courts or magistrates. They were handled privately, quietly, permanently. Rome did not need public executions to enforce obedience within its families. The punishment of dishonored daughters took place beyond the reach of public scrutiny, hidden behind walls that law itself refused to cross. What happened there was rarely written down, but its effects shaped generations. This is not a story about individual cruelty. It is a story about a system that granted power without oversight, a system that believed control was more important than justice. And it is the reason historians now say that what Roman families did to dishonored daughters was worse than death.
If you are listening to this because you believe history should confront what it once concealed, then you are already part of the work done here at Dark Inquest History, where forgotten lives are examined not for spectacle, but for understanding. The topic we are examining today is clear and uncomfortable. What Roman families did to dishonored daughters was worse than death. To understand how such a reality could exist, we must first understand the structure of Roman society itself. Rome was not governed primarily by compassion or equality. It was governed by hierarchy. At the top stood the state, beneath it the family, and at the center of every Roman household stood one figure whose authority was nearly absolute, the Paterfamilias.
The Paterfamilias was more than a father. He was a legal institution. Roman law granted him control over property, finances, marriages, and the lives of those under his authority. His power extended over children well into adulthood, including daughters who had long passed childhood. This authority was not symbolic, it was enforceable, and, crucially, it was private. Roman law rarely intervened in domestic matters. What happened within the household was considered internal discipline, not public concern. This legal distance created an environment where actions could be taken without oversight, justified by tradition, and protected by silence. Women in Roman society were valued primarily for what they represented rather than who they were.
A daughter represented her family's lineage, alliances, and moral standing. Her conduct reflected not only on herself, but on every male relative connected to her. In this system, personal identity mattered far less than perception. Dishonor was not a fixed crime. It was a flexible accusation. It could arise from rumors, rejected marriage negotiations, accusations of improper behavior, defiance of authority, or simply being perceived as difficult to control. Proof was not required. Suspicion was enough. Once a daughter was labeled as having brought shame upon the household, the issue was no longer moral. It became strategic. Families feared social isolation, lost alliances, damaged political futures. In elite households, a single perceived stain could affect generations. The response was often swift, hidden, and severe. Roman sources rarely describe what happened next in detail. That absence is not accidental. It reflects a culture that normalized removal without documentation. Daughters who fell from favor did not reappear in family records. Their names stopped being mentioned. Their presence vanished from inheritance lists, marriage contracts, and household accounts. In some cases, daughters were confined within the home, cut off from social contact, treated as if they no longer existed. In others, they were sent away under vague explanations, absorbed into distant households, religious institutions, or places where their absence would raise no questions.
The official reason was often framed as necessity or correction. The emotional reality was isolation, enforced as discipline. What made this worse than death was not only the suffering involved, but the erasure. Death in Roman culture carried ritual, recognition, and memory. Funerals mattered. Graves mattered. Names were spoken. To be erased while alive was to be denied even that final acknowledgement. These daughters were not mourned publicly. They were not defended. They were not allowed a voice. The system ensured that whatever happened to them would remain classified as family business, beyond moral evaluation. Lower-class families experienced similar pressures, though with fewer resources to conceal them.
For them, the consequences of dishonor could mean abandonment, forced dependency, or permanent exclusion from community support. Without a family's protection, survival became uncertain. Yet even then, the blame followed the daughter, not the system that discarded her. Roman moral philosophy reinforced this imbalance. Writers emphasized female modesty, obedience, and silence as virtues. Deviations were portrayed as threats to order itself. The idea that control was necessary for stability justified extreme measures, as long as they preserved appearances. There is no evidence that daughters were given formal hearings within their families. There was no requirement for explanation, no mechanism for appeal.
The decision rested with male authority, supported by law and custom. What emerges from the historical record is not a series of isolated abuses, but a pattern. A quiet, widespread understanding that certain lives could be managed, contained, or removed if they disrupted order. That understanding was passed down, normalized, and rarely questioned. By the late Republic and early Empire, Rome prided itself on legal sophistication. Yet this sophistication ended at the threshold of the home. Inside, ancient power structures remained intact, untouched by reform. This contradiction defined Roman society. Publicly, it celebrated justice. Privately, it tolerated unaccountable control. The daughters who disappeared from records were not exceptions.
They were evidence of how the system functioned as intended. As Roman society expanded and power concentrated within elite households, the pressure placed upon daughters intensified rather than eased. The family was not a refuge, it was a mechanism, and within that mechanism, obedience was treated as proof of moral order. Roman households functioned as miniature states. Authority flowed downward. Questioning it was seen not as disagreement, but as instability. For daughters, this meant their lives were governed by expectations they did not create and could not escape. Their bodies, movements, and futures were regulated in the name of preserving family standing. Marriage was central to this system.
It was rarely about personal choice. It was a transaction designed to strengthen alliances, secure property, or stabilize political ties. A daughter's role was to comply without resistance. Any hesitation, refusal, or perceived impropriety could be interpreted as defiance, and defiance in Roman culture was dangerous. The problem was not merely behavior, it was perception. A rumor could carry the same weight as fact. A rejected suitor could damage reputation. A delay in marriage could raise suspicion. Even grief, anger, or visible distress could be framed as disorderly conduct. In a culture obsessed with control, emotional expression itself could become evidence of failure. Once suspicion entered the household, the response was rarely public.
Roman families avoided courts when possible. Public exposure risked attention, questions, and judgment. Instead, discipline was enforced internally. The goal was not justice, it was containment. This containment took many forms. Some daughters were confined to domestic spaces, removed from social life, and treated as liabilities to be managed rather than members to be protected. Their days narrowed, their presence faded. They remained alive, yet absent from the world that once recognized them. Others were transferred, sent to distant relatives, assigned to religious duties under unclear circumstances, removed from the city under the justification of necessity or correction. These explanations were accepted because they were familiar.
Everyone understood what they implied, even if no one said it aloud. What mattered was that the problem disappeared. The psychological impact of this system cannot be overstated. Daughters grew up knowing that affection was conditional. Safety depended on compliance. Silence was rewarded. Trust was dangerous. Love itself became uncertain because it could be withdrawn at the moment it was deemed inconvenient. Roman writings rarely capture this inner reality. Most sources were written by men who benefited from the system. They praised discipline. They admired restraint. They described family authority as essential to social stability. The absence of female testimony was not accidental. It was structural.
Yet traces remain. Letters that hint at sudden absences, legal disputes over inheritance where a daughter's name is inexplicably missing, religious dedications made in anonymity. These fragments suggest lives redirected without consent and erased without explanation. For elite families, the stakes were even higher. Political ambition amplified fear. A single perceived scandal could undermine years of careful advancement. Daughters became risk factors. Their behavior was monitored not out of care, but out of calculation. In this environment, punishment did not need to be visible to be effective. The threat alone was enough. The knowledge that one misstep could result in social disappearance shaped behavior more effectively than force ever could.
This is how systems of control sustain themselves, not through constant enforcement, but through anticipation, through fear internalized so deeply that resistance feels impossible. It is important to understand that these practices were not considered extreme at the time. They were considered responsible. A father who acted decisively was praised for protecting his household. A family that resolved its own problems quietly was admired for its discretion. The law supported this mindset by refusing to intervene. Roman legal texts emphasized paternal authority while remaining vague about its limits. This vagueness was not a flaw, it was a feature. It allowed power to operate without accountability. Even when philosophers debated morality, they rarely questioned this structure. They discussed virtue, honor, and order in abstract terms, while accepting the domestic hierarchy as natural. The suffering that resulted was dismissed as unfortunate but necessary. What made this system especially cruel was its permanence. A daughter once marked as a source of dishonor rarely recovered her position. There was no formal path to restoration, no public acknowledgement of error, no apology. Time did not heal the damage. Silence preserved it. For lower status families, the consequences were often harsher in practical terms. Without wealth or influence, a removed daughter had fewer options. Exclusion from the household meant exclusion from protection, resources, and community standing.
Survival depended on adaptability, endurance, and often invisibility. Yet regardless of class, the pattern remained the same. Responsibility was assigned to the daughter. Authority remained unquestioned. The system reinforced itself through repetition. At this point in the story, it becomes clear that what we are examining is not a series of tragic decisions, but a cultural logic. A belief that order justified sacrifice. that reputation outweighed humanity, that control was a virtue. If this examination resonates with you, if you believe history should confront the systems that normalized silence and disappearance, then continuing this work together through dark inquest history is not passive viewing.
It is participation in remembrance. As the Roman Empire stabilized under imperial rule, these domestic practices did not disappear, they adapted. Imperial ideology emphasized family values and moral restoration, yet left the private authority of fathers intact. Public virtue was celebrated, private control remained unquestioned. This contradiction deepened the harm. The empire presented itself as civilized while allowing unchecked power within its smallest units. The household became a place where law ended and tradition ruled. By now, the emotional cost to daughters was profound. Fear shaped identity. Compliance became survival. Trust eroded. The knowledge that one's fate rested entirely in another's hands created a form of captivity that left no visible chains.
And this is where the system reached its most dangerous point. When control becomes normalized, cruelty no longer needs justification. It simply operates. By the height of the Roman Empire, the system had refined itself to operate without resistance. The rules were rarely spoken because they no longer needed to be. Daughters understood them long before they were tested. Families enforced them long before outsiders could notice, and society accepted the outcomes as inevitable. What changed during this period was not the authority itself, but the emotional distance with which it was exercised. Earlier generations had framed family discipline as painful necessity. Now it was framed as duty. Personal feeling was pushed aside in favor of preservation.
Fathers were expected to act decisively, without hesitation, because hesitation implied weakness. Weakness invited disorder. In this environment, a daughter's value was increasingly abstract. She was not measured by her well-being, but by her usefulness to family stability. When that usefulness was questioned, concern for her future quickly dissolved. The system did not ask whether she was treated fairly. It asked whether the family remained intact in the eyes of others. Crises often began quietly. A disagreement, a rumor carried from one household to another, a failed negotiation. Rarely did the daughter fully understand the accusation. She was not informed of evidence because evidence was not the point. The perception of risk was enough to trigger action. From that moment forward, time worked against her. Delay created uncertainty. Uncertainty invited attention. Families moved quickly to restore order before questions could form. Decisions were made in closed rooms among men who shared the same assumptions and fears. The daughter herself was excluded from these discussions. She was not treated as a participant in her own life, but as a variable to be controlled. Her absence from the process ensured that the outcome would favor authority over understanding. This was where the system revealed its most unsettling feature. It operated without malice, yet produced devastating results. Many of those enforcing it believed they were acting responsibly.
They believed they were preventing greater harm. The cruelty lay not in emotion, but in logic stripped of empathy. The consequences that followed were final in practice, even if not always acknowledged as such. A daughter removed from her household rarely returned. Her social connections dissolved. Her identity became undefined. She existed in a space without recognition, where survival depended on remaining unnoticed. Roman culture offered no language for this kind of loss. There were words for exile, for death, for punishment, but there was no category for being erased while alive. This absence made the harm easier to ignore. In historical accounts, these women appear only indirectly, as gaps.
As unexplained transfers of property, as sudden changes in family composition. Their stories must be reconstructed from what is missing rather than what is recorded. This silence was not accidental. It protected everyone except the one who suffered most. Families avoided shame. Society avoided discomfort. The law avoided responsibility. The cost was paid by daughters whose names faded from memory. At moments of heightened tension, when political instability or social change increased anxiety, enforcement became harsher. Periods of reform often intensified private control rather than easing it. When the state emphasized morality, households responded by tightening discipline. This pattern reveals a crucial truth. Systems of oppression often grow stronger when they claim to defend virtue.
The more Rome spoke of order and tradition, the less tolerance it showed for deviation. Daughters became symbols of that anxiety, absorbing the pressure created by forces beyond their control. Some attempted to resist in subtle ways, silence used strategically, compliance that masked inner refusal, emotional withdrawal. These were not acts of rebellion in the modern sense, but they were survival strategies. The system left no room for open defiance. Others simply vanished from the record entirely. Their absence became normalized. Future generations accepted incomplete family histories without question. The missing were treated as irrelevant, as if their absence required no explanation.
This normalization is what makes the system so difficult to confront today. There is no single event to condemn, no dramatic moment that forces recognition. Instead, there is a slow accumulation of quiet decisions that together created lives defined by fear and loss. At this point in the story, it is worth pausing to reflect on why these narratives matter now. Not because they are sensational, but because they reveal how easily power can be justified when it operates in private, how suffering can be dismissed when it leaves no visible trace. If continuing to uncover these hidden structures feels like a responsibility rather than curiosity, then following dark inquest history is not about consuming content.
It is about standing against the silence that once made this system possible. The climax of these stories was rarely dramatic in appearance. There were no public scenes, no official announcements, no acknowledgement of consequence. The final moments often involved sealed doors, unspoken decisions, and a sudden absence noticed only by those closest, if they noticed at all. This is what made the experience worse than death in Roman terms. Death, at least, was recognized. It marked an ending. It allowed for ritual, for memory, for closure. Erasure offered none of these. It suspended a life in a state of unresolved loss. Families moved on. Alliances were repaired. Reputations stabilized. The system declared itself successful.
But the emotional damage did not disappear. It lingered in behavior, in caution passed from mother to daughter, in warnings spoken quietly, in lives shaped by anticipation of punishment rather than hope of protection. Over time, this inheritance of fear became cultural instinct. Even daughters who were never directly punished learned the lesson. Visibility was dangerous. Trust was conditional. Safety depended on conformity. Roman society did not collapse because of this. In fact, it endured. That endurance is often cited as evidence of its effectiveness. But endurance alone is not proof of justice. Stability can be built on suffering as easily as on consent. By the late Empire, these domestic practices were so embedded that few questioned them. Even as laws evolved and institutions changed, the private authority of families remained largely untouched. The silence continued. Only centuries later, when historians began examining what was missing from the record, did a different picture emerge. A picture of lives constrained, redirected, and erased, not by accident, but by design. What we are left with now is not a complete story, but a responsibility. To recognize that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, that silence can be engineered, that harm does not require spectacle to be real. What followed was not outrage, reform, or public reckoning. What followed was quiet continuity. Roman society absorbed these disappearances without disruption.
Families adjusted their narratives. Records were edited through omission. What could not be explained was simply not mentioned. Inheritance lines continued. Marriages were renegotiated. Public life moved forward as if nothing had been lost. This was the final stage of the system's effectiveness, not the punishment itself, but the forgetting. Rome remembered victories, laws, emperors, and monuments. It remembered men who expanded borders and stabilized power. It remembered order. It did not remember the cost paid within households to maintain that image. The daughters who vanished were not considered historical subjects. They were treated as private complications, resolved in private ways. Over time, this absence hardened into tradition.
Later generations inherited incomplete histories and accepted them as normal. Missing names raised no alarm. Silence became evidence of propriety rather than loss. The system succeeded because it taught people not to look. Even when Roman culture changed, when new religions spread and new moral languages emerged, the core assumption remained intact, that family authority was beyond scrutiny, that what happened behind closed doors was not the concern of society, that stability justified sacrifice. The result was a legacy of fear that outlived the empire itself. The lesson passed down was subtle but enduring. Obedience ensures survival. Visibility invites danger. Questioning authority carries consequences that may never be spoken aloud. This inheritance shaped behavior long after Roman law faded. It influenced how families understood honor, how daughters were instructed, how silence was framed as virtue. The emotional logic of the system proved more durable than its institutions. Historians attempting to reconstruct these lives face a difficult task. The evidence is fragmented by design. What survives are indirect traces, gaps that must be read carefully. A sudden change in household composition, an unexplained absence from a will, a dedication made without a name. These are not accidents of preservation. They are the outcome of deliberate erasure. Understanding this forces us to reconsider how we define historical harm. Not all injustice announces itself.
Some of the most damaging systems operate quietly, normalized by repetition and protected by privacy. They leave behind orderly records precisely because disorder was removed from view. What Roman families did to dishonored daughters was worse than death, not because of any single act, but because of what it denied them afterward. Death acknowledged a life. Erasure denied it. It removed not only presence, but meaning. To be denied memory is to be denied existence in history. The final injustice was that these daughters were not allowed to be remembered on their own terms. Their lives were reduced to problems solved, risks managed, names omitted. The system ensured that their suffering would leave no mark that demanded response.
And yet, the fact that we can trace these patterns at all means the erasure was never complete. Silence leaves shapes. Absence leaves questions. The record resists closure. Remembering them now does not undo what was done, but it interrupts the final stage of the punishment. It restores presence where absence was enforced. It acknowledges that these lives mattered, even if the system insisted they did not. This is why confronting this history matters, not to condemn the past from a distance, but to recognize how easily authority becomes cruelty when shielded from accountability, how often order is preserved by sacrificing those with the least power to resist.
If preserving the memory of those history tried to erase feels necessary rather than optional, then continuing this work with Dark Inquest History is not about subscribing to a channel.
It is about refusing to let silence finish the job that power began. Because the most enduring act of defiance these daughters are allowed now is to be remembered.